The aim of this lesson is to get you familiar with how aperture priority works and when you can use it. Aperture priority is often the mode of choice for people who have not yet discovered the creative expression that you can have using manual mode. You set your aperture, which is an iris-like diaphragm in the lens, to control how much light enters. The f-stop numbers govern the size of this opening. The smaller the f-stop number, the more light will enter the camera. With larger numbers, less light will enter the camera. In aperture priority mode, as you choose an f-stop to use, your camera will automatically set the shutter speed so your photo will be well exposed according to how the camera is programmed. The aperture setting also has an influence on the amount of your composition that will be in focus. This is known as the depth of field and is an important component of photographic composition. With wider aperture settings, lower f-stop numbers, you will have less in focus. With narrow apertures, higher f-stop numbers, you will have more in focus. Prime lenses with their wider aperture settings allow for a much shallower depth of field. It's good to keep this in mind. There are a number of other factors which contribute to depth of field. Using aperture priority mode, you can choose to have control over how much of your photo is in focus. This is why many people opt to use this mode. Aperture priority is good to use with static subjects when the control of your shutter speed is not so vital. How aperture controls the amount of light that enters the lens and how your aperture choice influences the depth of field. That is how much of your photo is in focus. Find a static subject that's not too close to a background. Set your camera to aperture priority and choose the lowest f-stop number on your lens. Take 1 or 2 photos. Now change your aperture setting to an f-stop number in the middle of the range your lens has. This may be around f11 or f16 on a kit zoom lens. Take 1 or 2 more photos. Now set your aperture to its highest f-stop number, the narrowest aperture, and take a few more photos. You may need to place your camera on a firm surface or a tripod when you're using the highest f-stop number. At this setting, not so much light is able to enter the lens, so your camera will compensate by using a slower shutter speed. This speed may be too slow to avoid camera shake when you're hand-holding your camera. If you can make some photos where there's strong light in the background, please do. And as usual, take some notes about the photos you're making. Compare the photos on your computer, make sure your subject is in focus, and then check to see how sharp the background is at each of the different settings. Key points from this lesson are: aperture priority is often the mode of choice for people that have not yet learned how to use manual mode. In aperture priority mode, as you choose an f-stop to use, your camera will automatically set the shutter speed. Aperture priority is good to use with static subjects when the control of your shutter speed is not so vital. The aim of this lesson is to get you familiar with shutter priority and when to use it. With shutter priority, you're in control of the shutter speed and your camera will calculate and set the appropriate aperture for the lighting conditions. The shutter in your camera comprises of 2 curtains. When the shutter is closed, it blocks light from hitting your camera sensor. When you press the shutter release button, the first curtain will open, allowing light to affect the sensor. Then the second curtain will close. The duration is called the shutter speed and is measured in fractions of seconds or seconds. The fastest speed, letting in the least amount of light to affect the sensor, will be around 1/4000th of a second. The slowest speed can be as long as 30 seconds or more. This varies from camera to camera. Extremely fast and slow speeds are not so commonly used. The range you will most likely use is between 1/500th of a second down to around 1/60th of a second. This depends on the amount of light that you're taking photos in. Choosing a shutter speed which is too slow can cause problems. Camera and/or subject movement when making an exposure with a slow shutter speed can cause blurring in the photos. Fast shutter speeds are necessary for avoiding blurring of subjects which are moving. People who photograph sports, for example, and have not yet learned to use manual mode, usually prefer shutter priority because it allows them to pick a shutter speed that will avoid a blurry subject. The speed your subject is moving will determine how you set your shutter speed. Photographing a person walking will not require such a fast shutter speed as photographing motor racing or a bird in flight. The faster your subject is moving, the faster shutter speed you'll need to choose to ensure that your subject is sharp in your pictures. How the shutter speed affects your exposure and also the movement of your subject and camera. For this challenge, you'll need to find a static and some moving subjects. First, with your static subject, set your camera to shutter priority and ISO 400. Have your shutter speed at 1/1000th of a second for the first photo. Now, progressively halve your shutter speed and take one more photo at each speed until you reach 1/4 of a second. So starting at 1,000th of a second, the second photo will be a 500th, then a 250th, 125th, etc. down to 1/4 of a second. Be careful to hold your camera well. Doing this challenge will help remind you what the slowest shutter speed is that you can hand hold at. When you finish this set of photos, reset your shutter speed to 1/1000th of a second and repeat the challenge with a moving subject, a person walking or some slow moving traffic or the likes. Now, if you've got time, reset your shutter again to 1/1000th of a second and repeat the process with a faster moving subject. Don't forget to take notes of your settings and also the things that you're observing and thinking about while you're taking these photos. Look carefully at the photos on your computer and take notice of which photos are sharp and the shutter speed used for each of them. Remember to save a few of them to your favourites folder. Key points from this lesson are: shutter priority gives you control over the shutter speed. Choosing a shutter speed which is too slow can cause problems with movement. The speed your subject is moving will determine how you set your shutter speed.